Was that? No, it's great. All right, it's good to have everybody. I was waiting for my clock to turn over 6 o'clock, and it just did. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for coming back this evening as we spend a little bit of time looking at some other things in the Word. Before we do that, we do want to take some time for prayer. And I just ask, first of all, remember the missionary that I mentioned this morning that's in need of medical attention. They'll be doing some traveling this week to get that medical attention. And if y'all would just pray for them, they need wisdom and just some. They need some miraculous intervention to take place. So we also have one of the young ladies connected to the church that has been dealing with some health issues, and actually some of the medication is causing other problems. So the family asked me today if we just pray for the young lady. So that's without mentioning too many details, but just pray for another young lady. Are there other prayer requests that you'd like to mention this evening? Okay, unspoken. Good job sending people around to the other side. I saw that, by the way. So, all right, Pastor Wiggins, would you mind leading us in prayer this evening? Amen. It is great to be able to follow up with y'all this evening, and I'll actually start the follow-up with a word of praise. This morning, throughout today, we've had a total of 5 people surrender their lives to Christ. So 3 of them this morning, and then 2 this afternoon. Sherry Davenport picked up 2 individuals to take them to Greenville, and they are students here at Clemson, and because they were a captive audience, Sherry shared her story, and when they got ready to get out, she asked them if they would like to pray to receive Christ, and they did. And they're supposed to be at her ESL class this week and come to church with her next Sunday. So the Lord is working in great ways. It's very exciting to be able to see some of that, and it makes you appreciate where you're at and what you're doing, because that's what the Lord called us to. I actually had a conversation with some other pastors recently, and we were talking about the fact that I believe every church, every pastor wants to grow. And sometimes it's probably frustrating for them when they don't see that growth that's taking place. We're so blessed to be in a place where we see the Lord moving and doing great things. And I hope y'all are as excited about it as I am. Anyway, just thought I'd share that with you. Tonight we're going to follow up a little bit on what I shared this morning, and I'm not going to dig into Nehemiah, and part of the reason for that is because in the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking in Nehemiah and digging deeper. But this morning I talked about Esther, so I want to follow up a little bit from the book of Esther. So I'm going to invite you, if you want to turn to Esther chapter 4. Now, before we get into Esther chapter 4, I want to share a little bit of what's happening here in this segment. I will tell you that there is a Persian king. His name is Xerxes. I referenced him this morning. I think sometimes he gets a little bit of a bad rap, and some of that's because he was foolish, but at the same time, I think that he actually was a little bit more tender-hearted than what he gets credit for. So as we read his story, Xerxes has a wife. Does anyone know what his wife's name was before Esther? I heard it. Vashti was the wife. That is correct. She apparently did something foolish. She said no to her husband. Do you realize how foolish that is? So apparently the king is very much full of himself, and he wants to be able to make sure everybody else appreciates how great he is and the great things that he has at his disposal. He actually goes through a 6-month period, a time of 180 days, where he basically is showing off his wealth to anybody who would come and see it. He is wanting people to know. He's over 127 provinces. He wants everybody to know exactly how great he is and how prosperous he is. At the end of the 180 days, he decides he's going to have a party. Basically a festival for all the men in this region and inviting them to come in. When I say all the men, it's not even just the wealthy ones. From the lowest to the greatest, he invites them to this celebration. As a part of this celebration, they also include all kinds of alcohol. I got to tell you, this is not the kind of party that most men want to be a part of. Now, here's the reason. Vashti also, during that 7-day period, had a party, a celebration with all the women of the area, which means these men are all partying with each other, and there weren't even any women around. So during this festival, Xerxes sends for Vashti, and he wants her to come because apparently she was a beautiful young lady, and he wants to show her off, and she says no. Needless to say, he is upset over this. Actually, I kind of laughed just a little bit as I was reading through it this week. The concern is that other wives will begin to act in the same way that she does. And when their husbands tell them to do something, they're going to be empowered to say no. So the king needs to make an example of his beautiful wife. And actually has her deposed, doesn't have her killed, just basically says, you're not going to be treated as my wife anymore. You're going to be put away, and I'm going to have nothing to do with you. That leads to another situation for King Xerxes. Xerxes now doesn't have a wife, and he would like one. So basically the idea is presented to him by his advisors. let's search out for a young lady to be your bride. And what they do is they order a decree throughout the entire kingdom, basically trying to find the most beautiful young ladies and inviting them to come before him. This is a 180-day process as well. And they begin the process of trying to prepare these young ladies to come before him. And there's one who stands out. Y'all know who it is because it's her book, Esther. The only thing is, nobody knows who she is. Well, it's not really true. She's got an uncle named Mordecai, who is also a Jew. But this Mordecai is an important person who has done well to take care of King Xerxes. Actually, at one point, there is a threat on King Xerxes' life by individuals in the kingdom. And Mordecai finds out about it, and he rescues the king. He actually warns him what's taking place. They check into it. They find out that what he says is true, and the individuals who conspired against the king are actually killed. Now, that's important because as we look at this story, Mordecai will play an important role. We're going to be in Esther chapter 4 tonight, and we've reached a point now where Haman, one of the advisors to the king, the most trusted advisor to the king, has become very bitter toward the Jewish people. And just to be more direct, he is bitter toward Mordecai. Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. Maybe it's because he has chosen only to bow down to the Lord, only to bow down to God. I would assume at some point he bows before the king, but he knows better. He's not going to bow in front of Haman. And Haman becomes furious with Mordecai. Haman realizes Mordecai is a Jew, and Haman comes up with this idea to get rid of all of the Jewish people. King Xerxes okays it. He gives his approval. A decree is sent out to the entire kingdom with his signet ring, basically his signature, saying, I approve of this act. Well, the king didn't even know what he was saying because he didn't know his wife, Esther, was a Jew. Mordecai, the one who saved the king, was a Jew, but he has given approval. Obviously, Mordecai wants his niece, Esther, to do something about it. We're going to begin in verse 9. And in verse 9, basically, Mordecai is angry. He is upset. He has wept. He has torn his clothes. He is wearing sackcloth, which means he cannot go into the king's presence, into the king's gate, because of the fact that he is so broken. However, Esther sends someone out. In verse 9, it says, Hathach, this is one of the eunuchs, Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king has but one law, that they may be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. So before we hear his answer, I want you to realize what's happening. Mordecai is saying to Esther, I need you to go to the king. I need you to say so. I need you to defend your people. And she is reluctant to do so. I could die. I mean, if I go uninvited, he could order that I be killed. So he sends back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Now, it is that last phrase that has been used so often when we talk about Esther. Perhaps she is in this position for such a time as this, just so that she can be used by God to help deliver the people of Israel. One of the things that stands out to me is the statement that Mordecai makes to her in this address. First of all, if you think that somehow you will be the only Jew to escape, you are wrong. He actually has great confidence in the Lord. He actually says, if you remain silent, if you don't say anything, if you decide not to be a part of the solution, If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. What that means is if you don't do it, God's going to find somebody else to do it. I trust the Lord. I know that he's going to take care of us. I'm going to tell you, reading this, I have a different appreciation for Mordecai. Mordecai was not only one who he would help orchestrate some things down the road, and he was one who represented the Lord well, but he had an incredible confidence that the Lord would provide regardless of how difficult things would be. The Lord will find some way to deliver us. It might be you, Esther, but even if it's not you, the Lord is going to provide through someone else. Now he goes on to say, but you and your father's family will perish. If you don't do this, there will be accountability, but it's going to be on you. He's actually putting the responsibility here on her because you've got the opportunity. Maybe God put you in this position just to be able to do this. And if you don't fulfill the role that you've been tasked with, then what's the value of you being in there? There will be accountability for this. Now, this is a really important idea, I think, for us. God has put us in incredible opportunities. There are things sitting in front of us where we have the opportunity to make a difference. Well, if we're not making a difference, if we're not using the opportunities God has given us, why would he continue to put us in front of those opportunities? Esther, you've got an opportunity. Maybe you're here for just such a time as this so that you can do these things. If you're not going to do it, what's the purpose of God giving you those opportunities? I'll tell you the truth. I want God to give me more opportunities. But in order to do that, I need to be faithful with the ones that he's put in front of me now. And that's the same for all of us. We need to make sure that we are good stewards with the opportunities that God places in front of us. In verse 15, Esther then sends a reply to Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. I told you a minute ago that I developed a greater appreciation for Mordecai because of his confidence in the Lord. I develop a greater appreciation for Esther because of her willingness to sacrifice herself here in this passage. Now, it begins here with her calling on Mordecai and their fellow Jews to a time of fasting and prayer. And again, just like this morning, not talking about just a brief passing moment where I'm going to pray and then 30 seconds later I go about my life as if there's nothing that's going on. Understand that all the Jews understand the decree that has been given, that there is a day that is coming where the Jewish people will be killed. So they know what's taking place. If anything, they might be trying to disguise themselves so maybe they're not included among the Jews, and maybe somehow they'll be saved or spared from this coming massacre. But in this moment, they are called to fast and to pray and to ask the Lord to intervene. 3 days of this. Don't eat, don't drink anything. I'll tell you the truth. I do fasting, intermittent fasting on a fairly regular basis. There is actually, on the more intense fast that I do, there's about a 36-hour window where I will fast. And I'm going to tell you, at the end of them 36 hours, I get grumpy. Can you imagine 3 days, night and day, no food, no drink, nothing, and instead take this time to pray? This is an incredible act of submission, and it's not just Mordecai, and it's not just Esther. Mordecai's instructed, go tell everybody else. I want all of us to do this. Even the people in my court, Esther speaking, even the people around me, we're going to go do the same thing. We're going to fast, and we are going to pray. Actually, one of the things that is interesting to me about this, and we actually see it a little bit later, there are attendants that serve Esther. I wonder if they all had Jewish backgrounds. Because according to what she says, She says, I and my attendants will fast as you do. It would seem that her impact was already being felt even among her attendants, where they too are beginning to embrace the faith of Queen Esther. I wonder how many people would embrace our faith if they could genuinely see it being lived out in front of them. Maybe we need to be a little more intentional to show our faith to others. Obviously, she does speak with boldness. I will go before the king in 3 days. And if I perish, if I die, if this is what comes of it, then so be it. Maybe I really am here for just such a time as this. And Mordecai does exactly what he is told. Now, I'm not going to read all of the next chapter to you, but in the next chapter, we see that on the third day, Esther will actually do exactly as she has promised to do. She'll actually enter into the king's presence, and as she enters into the king's presence, he is excited to see his wife. Now, she said earlier in the last chapter that it had been 30 days since he had called for her. So probably to have her coming to him is probably a rewarding thing. He's excited to see her, and he actually holds out his gold scepter, which is a symbol of you're welcome to come in. She comes in and she touches the gold scepter, basically saying, I am here to serve you. In verse 3, the king asked, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you. She has something that she wants from him, and he knows it. And then she beats around the bush just a little bit. Now remember, Haman is likely present at this moment in time. Haman is the most trusted individual in King Xerxes' court. Haman also is the one who hates the Jewish people, hates Mordecai, and wants to have all of them killed. Instead of just saying to the king, I need to talk to you about Haman because there's something he has done, she instead says, if it pleases the king, let the king together with Haman. Why would she want Haman to come to this thing? Why would she invite Haman? She already knows he's the one who's trying to have her killed. If it pleases the king, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Now, to be honest with you, I'm kind of wondering, Esther, why didn't you maybe she was a little nervous. Maybe she was a little scared to say anything. So instead she says, why don't you come and we'll talk about it over dinner. They come for dinner, and as they come for dinner, Queen Esther begins to speak up. Do you know what she says? How about y'all come over again tomorrow night? She's still afraid to be able to address the problem with Haman. You and Haman come back tomorrow night, and when you're here tomorrow night, I'll tell you what it is that I have been wanting to communicate to you. And what happens is that they agree to the terms. All right, you got to figure now, Xerxes is thinking, sure, my wife wants to spend time with me. That's great. I'll do that again. And I trust Haman. He's good. I'll have him here with us. That's not a problem. If that's what it takes to be able to eat a nice meal with my wife, I'll do that. Me and Linda on Friday, we went to the Smoking Pig out in Pendleton. And about the time we got there, we had just dropped Michael off at a fundraiser thing for a basketball team he plays with. And a storm came up. And all of a sudden the lights start flickering and they're losing power from the wind and everything else. And we get a phone call. They've canceled the fundraiser. And I'm thinking, come on, man, we're going to have to go pick up Michael. Every once in a while, it's nice just to get some time out. And for Xerxes, this was probably a rewarding thing. Oh, great, my wife, this beautiful young lady that stood out among all of the other women in the kingdom, she wants to spend time with me. So he agrees to the terms. Yeah, I'll gladly do that. We can do that again. And as they leave, actually, we see that Haman is thrilled absolutely with what is taking place. Skip down to verse 9 of chapter 5. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, He was filled with rage against Mordecai. So at that point, he's angry. Can you believe this guy? He won't get up. He won't bow down to me. He won't treat me with respect and honor. But here he is. He's just been invited to this great meal. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth. Look at me, I'm great. His many sons and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all. And this is where you just kind of, you can kind of imagine the pride that this guy has. I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. He's furious. All these great things that he's celebrating, it's all it's not even important to him because he's so angry at what's taking place with Mordecai. So actually they come up with this plan. He puts up a 50 cubit tall pole. Have a pole set up in verse 14, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and asks the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. And so he does. He takes this pole, he sets it up 50 cubits. Basically, the purpose of it being so tall is so that it can be high enough so that everybody can see it. Now remember for a second, Mordecai is the one who rescued King Xerxes. But Haman is going to ask to have Mordecai impaled on this pole. It's almost as if Haman didn't realize that Mordecai had done something great. Now, I told you earlier that I thought maybe Esther was afraid. Maybe she was nervous about speaking to the king. But I have another suggestion to you. Perhaps this was God's way of actually putting all the pieces in place. Haman was invited to join the king and queen for a meal, perhaps so that he could see Mordecai on his way out and become furious over what was taking place, simply to set things in place so that later on, when the deliverance came for the people of Israel, other things would be in place. Actually, skipping on to chapter 6, we see where God is using the events that have taken place. In verse 1, it says, "That night the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him." Man, I have nights where I can't sleep, and I sure wish I could get someone to just come and read to me. Tell me all the things that have happened in my kingdom. Tell me all the things that are good in my life. And that's basically what the king has. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling. So he is there to ask the king to have Mordecai killed. I want him impaled on a pole. At the end of verse 5, it says, the king ordered, "Bring Haman in." When Haman entered in verse 6, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Notice that there is no name that is given here. Now, remember, Haman was just invited to dinner last night with the king and queen, and nobody else was invited. Haman's thinking to himself, he's got to be talking about me. What honor? What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Man, what a great thought. This is going to be done for me. Haman is sitting there thinking, this is going to be great. Honor him. Make sure everybody knows exactly how much you love me. And the king responds to Haman because he thinks of Haman as a noble prince. Go at once. And at that moment, Haman's thinking, yes, go get ready. He says, get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai. Remember why Haman came that morning? To have Mordecai killed. I think a part of this is the Lord just I think he might have been trying to pour a little salt in the wounds that were there, just to point out that you seek to have God's people punished, but I will lift them up and I will provide for them. Do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Have you ever had to do something where the whole time you knew you were miserable doing it? I'll guarantee you that was Haman in this story. Haman this was the hardest crow that he ever had to eat because Mordecai knew how much Haman hated him. Mordecai knew that Haman was the one who orchestrated the coming massacre of all the Jewish people. Yet here it is, Haman is instructed, you be the one to take Mordecai and show him off to everybody. You celebrate him as the one the king honors. You make sure. In fact, I love it. It says that Haman had to place the robe on Mordecai. Do you know how humbling that had to be? To know that instead of putting him on a pole, we're going to put a royal robe on him. This is one of the hardest things Haman probably ever had to do. In verse 12, after Mordecai returned to the king's gate, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. Can you imagine the grief he felt? And he told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. What a change in perspective by the wife and the friends. They're the ones who suggested just a day earlier to have a pole 50 cubits high put up so that he can be impaled on the pole. And now the very same advisors, the very same friends, and even his wife are saying, you can't even stand against this Jew, Mordecai. It will result in your ruin. Well, Haman is not quite ready to hear that. Actually, while they are talking, it says, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Now, y'all know that this becomes a great moment of celebration, but not until after a whole lot of stuff happens. It says in verse 1, I'm in chapter 7 now. You've never seen me go through this many chapters in a single night probably, but this is a story that just continually runs. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. Have you ever been with someone who had a heavy heart and you could tell something was up? I imagine when Haman arrives there at the palace with the king and they're going to the banquet together to go be with Esther. The king's probably looking at Haman thinking, you okay? Because remember, his wife and friends have just declared that this is going to lead to your ruin. So there's fear and there's bitterness, and he's already been a little bit embarrassed throughout the day today. But they go to Esther's banquet. In verse 2, as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked again, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. And then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, this is the boldness that we didn't see in the first two times. When she said, hey, come to dinner with me, instead of saying, hey, I got a problem with Haman. When she said, let's do this again tomorrow night. Now we see the boldness that is here. If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. He loves his wife. He is thrilled with his wife. What do you mean, grant me my life? She continues, spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. At that, the king is furious. He's a little bit surprised. Who wants to have you killed? Who would want to have your people killed? Here's the thing. Nobody in royalty knew that she was a Jew. It had never been talked about. She was a woman. To be honest with you, her religious beliefs didn't seem all that significant in their culture. The fact that she had a Jewish descent didn't matter because now she's considered a Persian. She is the queen of Persia. Nobody cared whether she was Jew. The topic had never come up. King Xerxes in verse 5 asked Queen Esther, who is he? Who is the one who is trying to have you killed? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Esther said, and at this you almost expect maybe she got a little more bold, a little more direct. An adversary, an enemy. And when she said those words, Haman is probably thinking to himself, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that whoever it is held accountable. But then she names him, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. All of a sudden, being invited to dinner with Esther and Xerxes isn't such an honor. You're not quite as excited about it. Haman, it says, was then terrified before the king and queen. And the king got up in a rage, left his wine, went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, so he hasn't even said what's going to take place, but he already kind of knows, I'm in trouble. Realizing the king had already decided his fate, he stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. It's interesting. I just want to stop there because Haman wanted nothing to do with the Jewish people. But in the moment that he realized he was in trouble, he suddenly calls upon the mercy of the Jewish God. He's asking Esther, please spare my life, because he knows that God is a just but a loving and gracious God. Isn't that true of the world we live in today? Where they look upon us and the things that we stand for, and the world doesn't want to embrace anything to do with Christianity. But the moment that they need grace, now they want to turn to us and to our God. The moment they need healing, the very same people who may be bitter toward us because of our faith are coming to us and saying, can you pray for me? Can you pray that God would have mercy and heal me? In verse 8, this is one of those things. I kind of look at this as the Lord orchestrated all of this. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. You picture him coming over and he's begging for help, and as he's coming over to her, he trips and falls basically on top of her. And the king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in this house? And of course at that, I think I hear the most beautiful thing. It's raining. It's been a long time since we've heard rain. At this, the king is furious, and obviously Haman can do nothing to stand up. Actually, what happens is the king asks, basically, what shall we do? And one of the eunuchs lets him know. Now, remember what the wife and the friends said, have a 50-cubit pole put up alongside your house so you can hang Mordecai on it. In verse 9, it says, then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And the king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and then the king's fury subsided. Now, I'm going to stop with the reading there, but I'm going to tell you that the rest of the story is fantastic. Actually, as a part of the rest of the story, we have another decree that is issued which allows the Jewish people to be able to stand up and to fight for themselves, to protect themselves. And basically what ends up happening is all of the nobles, all of those who serve King Xerxes will actually stand in support of the Jewish people. So the very same people that Haman was going to have to actually fight against the Jewish people, they will not do so. There will be some who will, and they will die for it. There will be accountability. There will actually be those, and this is an interesting thought, because so often we think of the Jewish people as being just Jewish by birth, but actually in the Persian Empire, what happens in the days ahead is that many who are not Jews actually seek to become Jews because they see the favor and the blessing of God upon them, and they want to be a part of this as well. I want you to know God has always been about reaching more than just the Jewish people. So often we assume that because they are God's chosen people that God maybe loved them a little bit more than he did other people. Maybe he disliked some nations, but he loved this one nation. But God was always about redeeming people. And as these other individuals were choosing to embrace the ways of the Jewish people, God was far more willing than people could have ever imagined to accept them. And there were many who actually embraced the Jewish faith. Such an irony, because the Jewish people were there as basically a lower class individual, but God would turn things around. Mordecai would actually become second in command over all Persia. We think of Joseph as one who would rise up from basically nothing. He was a slave, then he was a prisoner, and the next thing you know, he finds himself as the second in command over all Egypt. Well, Mordecai's story is actually relatively similar. He didn't have to become a prisoner, but in many ways, he was viewed as a lower class of individual, but he served in the court of the king. He was a guard, he protected, he defended, and he would be raised up and would become second in command over all Persia. The only person who did not answer to him would be the king himself. Once again, God is taking those who are broken down, his own people, and he is lifting them up to put them in a position of authority. Now, as I shared this morning, the story of Nehemiah is a continuation of the story of Esther. That means that God didn't remove the Jewish people because of the fact that they were Jews. They stayed in Persia. They were still basically a lower class of people, but all of a sudden they were an honored class of people, partially because Esther has been elevated to the role of king. Mordecai is the protector of the king. And suddenly there is an incredible respect for the people of Israel. I want you to know today that, first of all, God does still raise up people to make a difference. Mordecai was put in just the right place at just the right time. Esther was put in just the right place at just the right time. And I would even say Xerxes, a man who was foolish, but a man who seemed very tenderhearted and open to what his wife instructed him to do, was put in just the right place at just the right time. God is still putting people in the right place at the right time. And I hope that includes you and me. The question is, what are we going to do with that? Are there still going to be people who stand against us? Yes, there will be Hamans. There will be individuals who they want their own agenda to be accomplished as opposed to God's agenda. But God is all about restoration. He offered restoration to the Jews, and he offered it to the many people who weren't Jews, but all of a sudden they thought, I want to be a Jew. I want this God. I want the blessing that comes with this God. I think God really wants to reach people in this community. The question is, will we be willing to show them that there is hope and there is a way? I told y'all earlier, I was celebrating that Sherry had the opportunity to share with two young ladies today who gave their hearts to Jesus. all of us have opportunities that are sitting in front of us. What are you going to do with it? Perhaps you're here for just such a time as this, so that you can be the light that brings hope to the people around you. I'm going to pray, and then afterwards we'll have some time for discussion. We got about 15 minutes still. So, Father, first of all, thank you for putting people in place to show us the hope that we needed. Thank you for the salvation that has come to us. Lord, as you open up doors for us, I pray that you would make us willing vessels, willing to do whatever it is that you call us to do. I pray that you would use us to change the world around us. I pray for the people that surround us every day. I know you have a heart for them. I know that you long to see them be made right with you. I thank you for the 2 young ladies today who made a decision for you. But I pray that you would use us to do more than just reach a couple young ladies. I pray that this community would experience an incredible transformation as you would change the hearts of so many people. Lord, as we talked about this morning, make us willing vessels who will do our part, but the greatest thing we can do is to come before you in prayer, because you're the one who can change hearts. I pray that you would begin to do that in them, begin to do that in us. And we'll give you praise for what you do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Any thoughts, questions, anything to go with what I talked about this morning or this evening? Y'all are just excited about the rain. I get it. I had somebody say tonight that we need to pray for rain because they prayed on Friday at the Friday prayer meeting for rain, and it poured on Friday night. So I think that's a great idea. We need to pray for rain. It's here. Any questions, thoughts? Miss Bonnie? Yeah. Yeah, there's a part of me I wanted to be able to show the VeggieTales video tonight and decided not to. There's a whole video just on the story of Queen Esther. Yes. All right. It's a great story. I don't know if you guys appreciate it. I think this is a great story of God's deliverance and the unexpected, sitting around the next corner constantly. God knew where everybody needed to be at the right time. He even had a pole put up already to take care of Haman. In fact, he had Haman do it. It's not an attractive thing. It's almost like Haman got to dig his own grave, except he put his own pole up there, and it was really intended for him. So, yeah, actually, 50 cubits would be about 75 feet. Yeah. Well, it was by his house, so perhaps he could get to it by the roof. So, yes. And then it would still serve the same purpose. The goal was to make an example so that others could see. In his case, he was hoping for Mordecai to be hanging from it. He wanted that to be an example to everybody else. Well, it still served in that capacity. By the way, the king will actually end up giving the property of Haman to Esther. And Esther will in turn it over to Mordecai to take care of the property, the estate of Haman. So actually everything is completely turned around to benefit the Jewish people, and specifically Esther and Mordecai. So great story. Yeah. Well, and you see that weaved all throughout the scriptures too, even in Nehemiah, as we get into the book of Nehemiah in the coming weeks, they build with great opposition. There are enemies that want to have the Jewish people destroyed. Even in the book of Ezra, it tells us that under the reign of King Darius, they sought to have the Jewish people stopped because they wanted to rebuild the kingdom. I didn't go into this morning, but perhaps some of the reason that Nehemiah was grieved was because the work that began while King Darius was in charge actually had to be put to a stop. So maybe there was this disappointment, this grief that I can't believe we didn't finish what we started. And it basically was still run down and as broken as ever before. So the same idea is true. You think about even in the book of Daniel, You have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're all basically being framed. Every time there is a new decree that's put in place that leads to people being thrown in a fiery furnace or being thrown into the lion's den, the purpose is to get rid of those Jews, the ones who are basically standing against the things that are dishonoring to the Lord. So you're right. We see it weaved all throughout the scriptures, and it still happens today. That's correct. Joe? Yep. Actually, in the promise that's given to Abraham, it specifically says that you shall become a blessing to all nations. So yes, that's exactly the purpose of the Jews, was not only to bring honor to the Lord, but to be a blessing to the rest of creation as well. But there's this sense of almost animosity toward them, I guess, because of the fact that God loves them. And anyways, he loves you too, by the way. So, anyone else? Raymond, would you close us in a word of prayer this evening?
Father, thank you for the hope we have in Jesus Christ. Thank you for your provisions for us. The fact that you do put us in situations or with particular time and particular subject. We ask that you would help us be faithful in our usage. Use us, Lord, to glorify you and your kingdom. Thank you for the word tonight. Thank you for your blessing. Thank you for the rain this fall. We pray that you will go with us as we leave this place, and Lord, may we enjoy your presence with us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all. If you can come back on Wednesday night, I know Richard's got a great message that all of us probably need to hear. So we invite you to come back as we study through the book of Revelation. And then don't forget, Saturday is our district conference. And then on Sunday, we're back here again. So we'd love to have you here as much as possible. Go in peace.